Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
I was standing in my kitchen, not doing anything special, just clearing a couple of plates and trying to decide whether I would bother with a real dinner or do the lazy adult thing and call it a night with cereal. When my phone buzzed with a group text from my sister that did not even have the decency to be private, and I stared at her sentence for a long second, because it landed with that familiar family tone that sounds like a joke until you realize they mean every word. She wrote that I was too much drama for the holiday trip and that everyone just wanted a peaceful time this year, and if I could respect that, they would appreciate it. I did not write back right away, which is new for me because I used to come alive when there was a mess to fix. The fixer moves fast, apologizes fast, smooths it all out fast, pays for it if needed, buys the gift, books the rental car, changes the flights, and swallows the feeling later, and I have been that person since I was barely out of high school, when my parents started leaning on me because I was the reliable one and my sister was the free spirit, which is a cute phrase people use when they do not want to call something by its actual name. So I stood there with the phone in my hand and I realized I felt strangely calm, not hurt in the way I expected. More like the morning after a storm when the sky looks blank and you can finally hear your own thoughts. If you have a sibling like mine, you already know the script, the one where the younger one borrows a little here and a little there, and then uses a phrase like "we are family" or "I swear I will pay you back when my check clears." And it drifts forward month after month until one day you realize you are paying for the very megaphone they used to talk about you. Because I had been covering her phone line for years, not because she could not afford it in any permanent way, but because she always had. A reason that felt urgent in the moment and temporary in the promise, and it was easier for me to add a line than to sit through another lecture about how tough things were and how I was the only one who understood. What made the message sting was not the insult itself, but the way she framed it like a public service announcement, as if my absence would save the holiday, as if I were the problem she finally worked up the courage to manage. And then my mother chimed in with that soft nudge that is not a nudge at all, saying let us all keep the peace, and my father added a thumbs up, which is about the most he has ever said in a family conflict, and there I was, the grown woman who pays her own mortgage, staring at my family acting like I had started a fire in the living room because I did not immediately offer to bring the kindling. I thought about every time I had bailed Courtney out of something that was not my responsibility, the time I negotiated with her landlord after a missed rent, the time I kept her on my car insurance because the quote she got on her own made her cry, the time she called me from a parking lot and said her card was declined and could I send something just until Friday, which often turned into the Friday after that, and I remembered how I would always tell myself that I was doing the right thing. Because family helps family, and I believed it was noble when in reality it just kept the wheel turning with me at the bottom. So I put the phone down, washed the plate like a normal person finishing a normal day, and I told myself a sentence I had never said out loud: I am allowed to stop, and it was weird how heavy and light those words felt at the same time. Because stopping is not dramatic at all, it is just choosing to remove yourself from the role you never auditioned for and were never paid to play, and I thought about the coming holiday and realized I did not want to be in a room with people who can use me and dismiss me in the same breath. So I did something I am sure they will later call petty or vindictive or uncalled for, but I think of it as accurate, fair, and long overdue. I opened my laptop, signed into the wireless account that I have managed forever because I am the only one who can remember passwords without writing them on sticky notes, and I looked at the list of lines with our names next to them, mine, my mother's, my father's, and Courtney's, the same Courtney who says I am too much drama to sit at the same table and share a plate of stuffing, and I paused, not to reconsider, but to make sure I was not acting from anger alone, because this is not about revenge for the sake of pain. This is about ending a pattern that has taught them that I am a service they can rate with stars and complain about when the service does not include free holiday cheer on demand. I clicked the option to suspend her line, and there was a small confirmation box that made me laugh because it asked if I was sure I wanted to make this change, and for once in my life the answer was yes without a wobble. And I confirmed it and watched the status switch from active to paused, and then I paid off the remaining monthly balance that I was already covering, and I removed the auto pay for her portion because that has been me the entire time. And I do not need to keep her afloat one more month, not after she said I am the storm cloud blocking her fun. I know exactly how this will play out. She will try to text me and it will fail. She will try to call me and it will go nowhere. She will jump to the family chat and paint me as the unstable one who cannot handle a joke. And they will pile on with their soft language about unity and forgiveness, while never once offering to pick up the tab they are so comfortable letting me carry. And in the morning there will be emails from her work account and messages through mutual friends and probably a post that is vague enough to protect her image and pointed enough to land on me. What comes next is not a scene, not a fight, not a screaming match over who owes who an apology, because I am past performing for an audience that claps when I pay and boos when I decline, and if she wants a peaceful holiday, she can have it. And she can also have the peaceful silence that comes when the person who makes the payments sits this one out, because I am just getting started, and the phone was only the first thing I decided to shut off. By the time the sun would have been up if I were the type to notice it, my phone had already collected a handful of emails from my sister's work account with subject lines that tried on different moods like costumes. One said, "Wow, really?" Another said, "I cannot call you," and a third tried this sugary tone about misunderstandings and peace that only shows up after someone realizes the convenience they took for granted is suddenly gone, and the family thread had moved from the "let us be kind" nudge to the classic chorus about how the holidays are stressful and words were said and surely we can be adults, which is everyone's favorite way of saying please keep absorbing the impact so we do not have to adjust our behavior. And I read it all without responding because I already knew that if I started explaining I would be dragged into the same loop where I present receipts, they present feelings, and then I pick up the tab. What surprised me, and I mean truly surprised me in that quiet way that makes you sit down and admit something to yourself, was how easy it felt to do nothing, no defense, no reason statement, no second draft of a message that says I love you, but just silence. Because I have learned that people who benefit from your silence only fear one kind of noise, and that is the sound of a door clicking shut on a resource, and as I stared at the thread I could finally see the pattern without the haze of guilt. The phone plan was not a gift, it was a tether. The same kind I had tied around my own ankles by putting her on my car insurance years ago when she called me crying about her rate and how the agent made it sound like she would never be able to drive again without paying half her paycheck. And I remember telling myself that it was temporary and family helps family and that I was being smart because bundling saved me a little each month, which was the way I packaged self-denial as strategy. So I opened my insurance account, the same portal I know better than I know the back of my hand because I've been the one who files the documents, uploads the photos after she backed into a pole at the grocery store, negotiates the premium spikes, and absorbs the quiet shame of being the adult who signs. And I looked at the policy details that listed me as primary and her as a named driver with her car tucked into the multi-vehicle discount like a stowaway in Coach, and I thought about every premium adjustment that landed like a surprise tax I could not vote against, the surcharge for the small fender bender that somehow remained on the record because she never finished the traffic course, the raise after the late payment that was technically charged to me because the card on file was mine, and I realized I have been walking around with a monthly reminder of my own unwillingness to let her feel the friction of her choices. I called the insurer because I wanted a human voice to hear me say the words clearly. And I told the representative that I was removing a vehicle and a driver from my policy effective immediately because I was no longer financially responsible for that driver and the vehicle was not garaged at my address. And I asked for a written confirmation and a time-stamped note on the account that indicated I had requested this change of my own free will. No accident, no sale, just a boundary, and the representative, who has surely heard versions of this from siblings and exes and old roommates, read me the standard disclosure about how the other party would need their own policy to legally drive, how there could be a lapse if they did not set it up promptly, and how my premium might adjust, and I said that was fine, please proceed, and within a few minutes I had a revised declarations page in my inbox with only my name and my car and a small reduction that felt like a tip from the universe. 4. Finally choosing myself. The fallout arrived on schedule because some trains always run on time. A forwarded notice from the insurer landed in my sister's inbox. She saw the words "removed" and "immediate," and then she did what she always does. She rounded up the spectators. She wrote an email to the family with enough capital letters to look urgent and enough soft language to look reasonable. She said I had sabotaged her right before the holidays and asked how she was supposed to get to work and whether I understood that. This could hurt her credit and whether I remembered that we are family, and then she copied me as if tagging me in a public comment would shame me into reversing the decision. And my mother wrote back with a paragraph about forgiveness that might have moved me years ago, and my father responded with some line about not escalating, and I felt that old muscle twitch to jump in and rescue the narrative, to make it all neat and calm. Instead, I replied once, not to debate, not to offer a compromise, but to make the truth short and undeniable in a way they could not spin. I wrote that I was no longer funding or guaranteeing anything for Courtney, that I wished her well, and that she was an adult fully capable of getting her own phone plan and her own insurance policy. And then, because I know how this goes when people think you are bluffing, I attached the confirmation letter from the insurer with the effective date highlighted, and I closed the email without waiting for the replies because I could already picture them: disappointment dressed up as wisdom, guilt disguised as unity, and I am no longer paying the cover charge to enter that room. Within an hour, my sister sent a new email directly to me with a subject that tried to be legal sounding. She said she would be pushing the charges back to me if her rate was higher than before because I had created the problem. And that was the moment I felt the cleanest kind of certainty, the kind that does not need anger to be firm, because she still believed that I lived on the hook she hung in front of me whenever her life felt inconvenient. And she still assumed I would grab it to stop the arguing, and I did not. I closed the laptop, I made myself a simple dinner, and I thought about how every time in the past I had accepted a small indignity to prevent a larger explosion. I had taught them that my dignity was negotiable. And I decided that lesson was over. So now her phone cannot reach me, her car insurance no longer hides under my name, the family group is stretching its fingers ready to point and scold and beg in the same breath, and I am strangely steady. Because I have one more move to make before I go quiet for real, one more cut that will stop the constant drip of their access to me, and I am going to make it in a way that leaves no back door, no emergency lane, no spare key under the mat. Because if they want a peaceful holiday, I will give them the kind of quiet they never imagined, and it starts with me deciding who gets to reach me at all. The funny thing about drawing a boundary that actually holds is how fast people who never respected your time suddenly become urgent experts in communication. Because after I removed her from the policy and refused to play the family's favorite sport of group therapy without accountability, the messages multiplied in a way that would be flattering if they were not so obviously rooted in panic. And I watched the incoming pile stack up without responding because I had finally understood that the first person to speak loses the frame, while the person who stays quiet sets the terms, and I was done letting other people set mine. What I did next was not glamorous, and it did not feel like a triumphant movie moment. It felt like cleaning a drawer you have avoided for years, boring and necessary and strangely emotional. Because I sat down and walked through every place I knew my sister had access to me without having to face me, every auto-pay that ran through my cards in the background because it was easier to let it ride, every family account that made my life cheaper while keeping me tied to hers, and I made a list that looked like a timeline of all the small capitulations I had filed under convenience, the shared streaming bundle I set up years ago because she wanted to watch something and said she would split it later, the store membership she used because the extra discount meant a lot to her budget, the cloud storage where I was the family organizer and she had quietly added more space that billed to me each month, and the password manager that I had, in a moment of peak naivety, let her join because she kept losing logins and calling me like I was tech support on retainer. I did not turn everything off at once because I did not want to feed the storyline that I was retaliating in a tantrum. I wanted my actions to read like what they were, an adult ending unpaid labor and financial sponsorship with clear steps. So I started with the small things and worked up. I changed the password manager to my account only and closed the family group. I removed her devices from the cloud storage and downloaded a copy of anything that could be argued about later. I updated the membership for the store with a new phone number so she could not claim it at checkout and act confused, and then I set my email to filter anything from her work domain to a folder I labeled for later. Because her habit is to perform apology and accusation in the same paragraph, and I know myself well enough to know that reading that kind of mess late at night would tempt me into a fight I do not want. The family did not love the silence, of course they did not, because silence meant they had to talk to each other without using me as the translator and the donor, so my mother tried a new tactic, calling my office line and leaving a message that sounded kind and careful, asking if we could speak like adults and reminding me of a childhood memory that was supposed to soften me, and I will be honest, it almost worked because I am not made of stone and I do not enjoy disappointing my mother, but then I remembered that memory had a second half, the part where I took the blame for something I did not do so the holiday would not be awkward, and I let the message sit. Then I sent a short email to her address that said, "I love you, I am safe. I am not available for this conversation right now. I will reach out when I am ready," and I left it there, which is a sentence that would never have left my fingers a year ago. Predictably, my sister escalated. Not because she wanted repair, but because she wanted access, so she went around me and called a mutual friend who texted me a long message about how this was not worth ruining the season, how family is complicated, how I could be the bigger person, and although I know this friend means well, I could see the subtext. Please resume being the shock absorber because we are uncomfortable with friction, and I did not bite. I thanked the friend for checking on me. I said I was fine and that I had everything under control, and I did not give a single detail, because another thing I learned this week is that details in the wrong hands are currency, and I am closing the bank. The revenge of this episode, if we are calling it that, was not a spectacle. It was the quiet removal of pathways, the unglamorous switch flipping that turns a house of access into a locked office with a clean desk. Because after I did the digital cleaning, I went further. I called my doctor and updated my emergency contact from my sister to a different friend who actually shows up when it is inconvenient. I removed my sister from the spare key list of the building. I called my credit card company and asked for new numbers because I had a flash of memory of a road trip years ago where she took a picture of my card to order something later. And while I do not think she would cross that line, the point of boundaries is not trusting other people's limits. It is knowing your own, and I am not living with that risk. Then came the part one did not anticipate, a notification from my bank about a recurring charge for a roadside assistance add-on I had completely forgotten I activated for her years ago when her car broke down and she cried in a parking lot. And the moment I saw it, something clicked, because it was not a lot of money each month, but it was the story in miniature, the way a past kindness kept billing my present without a conversation, and I canceled it with a 2-minute call that felt like a hard exhale, and while I was on the line, I scrolled further back through my statements and found a few more trickles, a parking app that was tied to my account, a delivery service annual fee that had quietly renewed, and a subscription to an organizational app one had forgotten she even used, and I canceled each one and took screenshots and filed them neatly in a folder named for the date, not because I planned to show anyone, but because I like knowing what changed and when. By the end of the day, my phone was quiet in a way I have not felt since before I became the person who fixes everything, not because they stopped trying, but because they were finally hitting walls that did not move when they pushed, and that night, right as I was ready to step away from the whole mess and sleep like someone who did not owe anyone anything, my email pinged with a subject line from my sister that was almost apologetic, full of words like perspective and misunderstanding and family, and I hovered over it for a long second, not out of curiosity, but because I could feel that familiar tug, the invitation to re-enter the cycle, and I did not open it, I flagged it, I closed the laptop. And I told myself that tomorrow I would make the next cut, the one that would make the lesson unmistakable, a clean break that even she could not spin as an overreaction, and if they think losing a phone line and an insurance discount hurt, wait until they realize who actually owns the services that keep their daily comforts running. By the time I woke up the next day, I had already decided that I was done playing receptionist for other people's emotions, which meant I was going to do the one thing my family hates more than confrontation. I was going to stop being available. And as simple as that sounds, it required a kind of administrative courage that no one teaches you, because stepping back is not just a feeling, it is a sequence of actions that closes the gaps where people who never apologize for using you keep slipping through. So I sat with my coffee and opened every app, every thread, every little tunnel into my day, and I began to shut them one by one while reminding myself that boundaries do not have to be loud to be real. I started with my phone because history has proven that people who do not pay a bill feel very entitled to its ringtone, and I moved through my contacts with a steady hand. Not out of anger, but out of respect for the version of myself who deserves a quiet morning. I blocked my sister. I muted my mother. I archived the group thread that always turns into a courtroom where I am the defendant and the judge and the bailiff who bring snacks, and then I went a step further, because I know how they think. I blocked them on the messaging apps that pretend to be casual, but are really just backdoors for the same arguments. I turned off read receipts. I disabled the feature that lets unknown callers ring through if they try often enough. And I set a simple voicemail that says I am not available right now. Please send an email if this is necessary, which is my way of saying that urgency is not contagious. Next came social, which I normally treat like a cluttered junk drawer I only open to find a battery, but my family treats it like a microphone they can borrow. So I changed the privacy settings to the tightest possible, removed them from the followers list, and cleaned out the old photo tags that let people pretend we are close because our faces appear in the same square. And as I clicked, I kept hearing my sister's favorite line, "Do not make this a big deal," and I felt such a strong wave of clarity because this is not a big deal. This is me reclaiming basic control over who gets to speak to me, and if that looks like a big deal from the outside, that is because they are used to me running my life like a public service desk that never closes. I knew there would be a professional angle because when people cannot reach you personally, they aim at your job to shake you loose. So I sent a short note to our office administrator and to my boss that said my family was going through a private conflict and I might receive unwanted calls or emails. And I asked that any non-work contact to my desk line be routed to voicemail and not transferred in real time. And I thanked them for protecting the quiet we need to focus. And then, because I am not naive, I added a firm filter to my inbox that filed anything from my sister's work domain into a review folder I would check once a day, which took the teeth out of her favorite tactic of sending dramatic notes during business hours to force me into public damage control. Blocking people is one kind of relief, but the bigger shift was deciding I would no longer be the financial scaffolding they build their comfort on, and while I had already handled the obvious pieces, the phone and the insurance and the little subscriptions that bled me while they smiled, I realized there was one more tether I had not cut because it hid under a label that looked harmless: the holiday trip, which in our family has always been presented as a collective thing, but is in practice a production that runs on my organization and my credit card. And as soon as I said those words in my head, I remembered the email from the rental company from a few weeks back, the one that thanked me for putting down the deposit to lock in the house. The deposit they all promised to square up after the holidays when money was less tight, which has been the seasonal lullaby for as long as I can remember. I opened the reservation portal, and there it was in writing. The booking was under my account with my card on file and a balance that would automatically charge on a specific date if the card remained active. And I sat with that for a minute because this was not about being petty. This was about accuracy. The same people who told me I was too much drama had quietly built their peaceful trip on my name and my credit, and if I did nothing, I would fund the scene I was not invited to, which would be the most on-brand outcome for the old me and the final insult for the new me. So I clicked the option that said change payment method and I removed my card. And when the system asked for a replacement, I selected the setting that notifies the primary contact that a new payment source is required within a window or the reservation will be suspended. Which is a beautifully boring sentence that translates to: if you want the house, you will attach your own wallet to it. Because I am not trying to ruin a vacation for sport, I did not cancel anything. I did not call the owner. I did not post a screed. I simply removed the thing that never should have been mine to carry, and I requested a written confirmation, which arrived within minutes and included language about a time frame for adding a valid card, and I forwarded that confirmation to the group with one calm sentence that said, "Since I will not be attending, I have removed my card from the reservation. Please update the payment method by the deadline to keep the booking," and then I turned off notifications and set the thread to archive automatically because I knew what would arrive next, and I did not need to see it land in real time to know it was coming. The replies, when I looked later, were predictably indignant in that familiar family tone that avoids naming the real issue. My sister accused me of embarrassing her because the host had sent a payment alert. My mother asked why I would do something like this so close to the holiday. My father suggested we all be reasonable and not let one argument ruin a tradition. And not a single person acknowledged the simple truth that I had been bankrolling a tradition I was now excluded from, which used to make me feel invisible and now made me feel oddly free, because there is no version of this that ends with me paying and staying home while they toast to peace. For the final move of the day, I did the piece I had been avoiding because it makes me feel both powerful and sad. I went through my contacts and I blocked every voice that had chosen convenience over respect. Not forever, maybe, but for long enough that my nervous system could reset. I blocked my sister on every channel. I blocked the cousin who loves to stir the pot and then pretend he is just being honest. I blocked the aunt who acts like God's receptionist and keeps a list of my supposed sins. And when the last block slid into place, I felt the kind of quiet that used to scare me and now felt like a closed door finally latched, and right then, as if on cue, an email popped up from my sister with a subject line that said, "I am trying here," which is her code for "I am not apologizing, but I want access," and I let it sit there unopened while the rental clock ticked for them, and I prepared myself for one last decision, because the final cut, the one that leaves no doubt, is coming next, and it has nothing to do with shouting and everything to do with refusing to be the engine under a car that keeps running me over. When I finally opened the long message my sister had sent with that careful subject line that tried to sound reasonable while still leaning on the same old pressure points, I read it straight through without stopping, and I could feel, in between the scattered half apologies and the list of reasons why the timing was bad and the holidays are hard and could we just reset after January, that none of it was actually about me as a person or even about what she had said. It was about the sudden inconvenience of not having me as the default system running in the background, and the line that gave it away was the one where she asked if I could at least keep things in place through the end of the year so she would have time to transition, which is a polite way of saying please keep funding me while I figure out who else will. And I sat there feeling a mix of sadness and clarity because there was a version of me, not that long ago, who would have done exactly that in the name of being compassionate and keeping the peace. I did not respond to her email, not because I wanted to punish her with silence, but because I finally understood that the only language she has ever respected is a closed door and a final invoice, so I took a breath. I opened my notebook where I had started to keep an honest list of what I had changed, not for drama, just for my records and my sanity, and I looked at the last 2 items that were still open. The shared services that I had allowed to live under my accounts with the kind of laziness that sounds like generosity until it drains you, and the holiday rental deposit, which up until that moment existed in this foggy zone where everyone assumed I would still be the grown-up who made sure no one's plans were disrupted even if I was unwelcome at the table they were setting. The services were easy and blunt in a way I used to think was unkind and now think is mercifully clear. I signed into the big ones people always forget they are using until the login fails and the reliance shows through. The streaming bundle that was tied to my card and my email, the delivery service membership that was somehow connected to my sister's phone, the shared shopping account where she had been checking out under my profile without ever looking at the total. And rather than changing passwords and playing cat and mouse, I did what any reasonable adult would do if a roommate moved out. I canceled the shared plan. I moved my profile to a new private account. And I requested prorated refunds for any unused months that had been paid for in advance. The system sent me those tidy confirmation emails that never come with family dynamics. And I filed each one under a folder with today's date because I am no longer doing chaos. The rental deposit required a steadier hand because I had promised myself I would not do anything that could be spun as me sabotaging their trip, and because I am, at my core, fair even when I am done. I went back to the host portal and checked the status that I had set the day before when I removed my card. The system had indeed sent an automated notice to the primary contact to add a new payment method by a specific deadline, or the reservation would be suspended, and the deadline was not a metaphor. It was a timestamp sitting a few hours ahead of me, so I did nothing until that mark hit, and when it did, the system put the reservation on hold and an email arrived from the owner addressed to me, because I was the original payer, asking where to direct the refundable deposit now that the booking was paused for lack of a valid card, and I stared at that line for a full minute because it represented years of me letting money bleed out in the name of family while never seeing it come back. I wrote back to the owner with one sentence that was both accurate and measured. I said the group would not be using my payment method and that I would like the refundable deposit returned to the original card on file. And within an hour, a receipt hit my inbox and the credit was already pending in my account, which felt less like a windfall and more like a correction. The simple arithmetic of finally refusing to bankroll a narrative where I am too much to invite but just right to charge, and I let myself feel the small, clean satisfaction of doing something that matched the facts on the page instead of the story in everyone else's head, because the facts were easy. I paid. I removed my card. They did not add theirs. The system refunded me. And if they want the house, they can attach their own wallet to it. Predictably, my sister's next email arrived with the same speed as every message when a convenience breaks. She said the host had reached out and asked for a new payment method, and she accused me of humiliating her because friends were copied on a separate thread about travel details, and now she had to explain that the booking was on hold. And she threw in a sentence about how she never asked me to cancel anything and that I was being punitive, which would have irritated me in the past because it ignores the part where she announced to our family that I was too much to be included, but this time it just rolled over me because I had proof of everything and, more importantly, I had no interest in litigating it with people who refused to read the paperwork, so I did the only response I planned to give her for a while. I archived the email and I updated my filter so that anything from her would skip my inbox and drop directly into the folder I check once a day, and I shut my laptop. I wish I could say there was a dramatic speech or a final showdown or a tearful moment that made everyone see the light, but the truth is cleaner and maybe a little colder, which is that I ended the week by sending one last message to the family thread that had already been muted on my side, a single paragraph that said I would not be attending the holiday trip, I would not be funding or managing any part of it. I would be unreachable on personal channels for the time being, and any necessary communication could be sent to my email where I would review it at my discretion, and then I left the thread for good, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is remove the audience and keep your own counsel. The relief did not show up as joy or triumph or a victory lap. It showed up as the first quiet evening I have had in years where I was not planning, fixing, or pre-forgiving someone for the way they would use me tomorrow. And while I know people might argue that I went too far or that I should have given more warning or that family deserves endless credit, I also know that my heart rate has been steady for the first time in a long time and my accounts are finally mine and I am sleeping without my phone face up in case someone needs me for something they could handle themselves, and that feels like the kind of win that does not need applause. She is still blowing up my email. The subject lines swing between apology and accusation like a pendulum that cannot decide which way to freeze, and maybe someday I will read them closely and find a sentence that sounds like accountability. Or maybe I will never open them, and that will be the boundary that finally holds. But either way, the last move was the right one, because I did not burn the bridge for fun. I just took back the wood I paid for, I stacked it neatly on my side, and I built a door that locks from within. If they are ready to knock like adults, they know where I live, and if not, the quiet is my proof that I finally outgrew the role they wrote for me and that the only drama left is the one they now have to manage without my funding or my silence.